Here's something that doesn't make any sense if you actually stop and think about it. You will probably never see that stranger from the market again. One conversation that you had, maybe it was 10 minutes in length, and it's been years since the conversation took place. But yet, you still think about it and can recall the conversation as if it were just yesterday. Meanwhile, there's a barista, a coworker, a neighbor, someone you've seen every single week for the last 2 years, and you couldn't tell me one thing about what they said to you last month or even yesterday. It's terrible to say, but even for some, you may not even know their name. More contact should mean more memory. But that's not how this is working. My name is Kiara, and this is Put the Guidebook Down. I asked this question all the way back in the very first episode of Reframing the Show, and never actually answered it. Why do we remember a stranger from a market in Serbia longer than we remember people we see every week? Time to actually answer it. Here's the assumption we're all quietly walking around with. Memory is basically a loyalty program. The more time you spend with someone or with something, the more you should remember about them. More exposure, more memory. Simple. Except it's not what actually happens. The friend that you see constantly turns into background noise. Somehow, the more familiar they get, despite them being your best friend, and the stranger you'll never see again gets permanently filed away in a vivid detail. That's not a coincidence. And it's not really about the stranger being more interesting than your best friend or the barista. It's about how your brain decides what's actually worth keeping. And it turns out repetition is one of the worst ways to earn a permanent spot in someone's memory. So maybe it's time to throw those flashcards away. Short-term memory may seem like a deep mystery as to why some things get filed into our memory storage while other things don't. There's actually an explanation for all of this. And once you make the connection, the market stranger stops being a mystery and starts being exactly what you predict. So why does this happen? Let's just jump right into it, starting with the novelty encoding effect, why something new gets flagged for our memory in the first place. This goes back to memory researcher Endel Tulvig, and it's been confirmed since through brain imaging work. When you encounter something genuinely novel, your hippocampus, the part of your brain handling memory formation, gets a hit of dopamine. That dopamine isn't just a nice feeling. It's a signal that tells your brain, this is worth encoding. Don't let this one slip. Pay attention. Then more context, such as sights, smells, tastes, etc., get captured in the moment and stored as an association with the memory. Familiar repeated experiences don't get that signal because your brain already has filed them and doesn't see a reason to reprocess them. They've essentially become habit or routine and fall into a level of safety and comfort in the memory. So your brain isn't firing that fight or flight dopamine rush every time, which can be energy draining. So here's what that means for travel specifically. Meeting a stranger in the market you'll never visit again is about as novel as experience it can get. You're in an unknown or a new situation, so your brain is quite literally chemically flagging it as important while it's happening. Meanwhile, seeing the same coworker for the 400th time doesn't trigger anything because there's nothing novel left to flag. Your brain already knows what's happening and just fires what it has in the memory storage for the encounter. You're not failing to appreciate that coworker in any way. Your brain just has already decided it doesn't need to re-encode someone it's already filed. The next framework is called the von Restorff effect, which explains why the stranger stands out even more because of who's around them, that context. This framework is from 1933. A German researcher named Hedwig von Restorff. Her finding, if you show someone a list of similar items with one item that's different, that one different item gets remembered far better than all the others. Not because it's inherently special, but because it stands out against a repetitive backdrop. Remember those memory games that you used to play as a child? This is literally the concept at work. Now, apply that here to travel. And it's not just the market stranger was novel on their own. They were novel against the backdrop of an entire week of familiar faces. That contrast is doing just as much work as the novelty itself. If you met that same stranger during a week where you met 50 plus more new people, they probably wouldn't have stood out nearly as much as they did in that other time. It's specifically the contrast between everybody else I know and this one person I don't. And that cements them in. That interaction is essentially sticking out, like in the memory game of this interaction, being not like the other interactions. So it must be processed and remembered differently before encoding and filing away in the brain. And all of this kind of goes into our last framework we're going to discuss around event segmentation theory. Why the familiar people disappear instead of just fading slowly. And this last one explains the part that's a little unsettling. Psychologist Jeffrey Sachs and his collaborators found that your brain organizes memory around what they call event boundaries, points where something actually changes. It could be a new place, a new conversation, a shift in what's happening from your daily basis. Those boundary moments are what your brain holds on to. Everything in between gets compressed within those boundaries. Now, here's the uncomfortable part. A week where every day looks basically the same, like the last one, generates almost no event boundaries. So instead of that week being stored as 7 distinct days, it gets compressed into one blurry, undifferentiated chunk. That's also, by the way, part of why time feels like it speeds up as routine sets in. So time really does feel like it's flying. Fewer boundaries mean less for your brain to actually hold on to. So the whole stretch collapses down to almost nothing. It's almost like the dangerous side of falling into a routine. There is no excitement or unaccounted for moment that spikes the dopamine to create the new memory boundary. That's what's actually happening to the coworker, the barista, the neighbor, your friend. It's not that they individually failed to be memorable. It's that the whole routine they exist in never got broken into distinct pieces to begin with. So there's nothing to retrieve them from. This memory and short-term concept is one that I personally struggle with a lot because it can make me feel like at times I didn't accomplish anything in the week. Or it fuels my drive or push to try something new, to book the next trip, to change things up all the time because I feel like I'm not remembering anything. When in reality, the event segmentation theory explains exactly why I'm unable to recall what I had for breakfast last Tuesday before heading into the office. Travel creates those boundaries and helps contain all of the exciting new things into our memories. For example, I've taken hundreds of Ubers. It's just the nature of travel and living in a big city. Many times these trips with the Ubers just blend together, and I can't recall 95% of them. However, the 5% that I'm able to recall is because there was something interesting with the conversations or unique events that occurred within that Uber ride that broke through the monotonous task of taking an Uber, formulating new event boundaries, prepping the brain for event capture. A few months ago, I was leaving from a company networking event, and it was late, so I opted to take an Uber rather than the subway back home. When my car arrived, I said bye to my colleagues and got in the car. In the ride, I was trying to catch up on my work emails and messages, as I normally would do, but then my driver was trying to ask me questions about how to get to the destination. I had noticed his pauses when trying to conjugate the sentences in English, drawing from my linguistics background and language learning skills, and his accent. I had also noticed the Georgian flag hanging on his rearview mirror. With my curiosity, I politely turned the conversation to inquire about the Georgian flag, which then led into a conversation about languages, which then turned into a whole other conversation in Russian, where it was easier for us to communicate in Russian other than English. Within our conversation, I learned about his story, his family's story, and several very good recommendations for eating Georgian food in New York City. Plus, I got an opportunity for some language practice, which I hadn't really had a chance to do since I left Moldova. This is an example of how pulling the 3 frameworks together makes the mystery of why this Uber ride is more memorable than my 50 plus other ones, and why those ones disappear. Novelty and the unknown experiences get flagged for encoding in the first place. Contrast against a familiar backdrop makes them stand out even harder. And the routine surrounding your regulars never gets segmented into distinct moments at all. So there's nothing there to compete with. It was never a fair fight to begin with. So here's the uncomfortable question this actually raises. If the stranger is remembered better purely because of novelty and contrast, does that mean the stranger actually mattered more? Or does it just mean your memory is a bad judgment of what matters? I don't think the answer is that people you see every week matter less by any means. I think the honest answer is that memory was never built to be a scoreboard for importance. It's built to flag changes or differences, irregularities in the day-to-day, not to flag value, which means the fact that you can't remember a specific thing your coworker said to you last month isn't a verdict on the relationship or your memory abilities. It's just what routine does to memory, regardless of who's inside that routine. And this is actually a relief if you sit with it, but it also means I don't remember much about this era of my life isn't the same thing as saying this era of my life didn't matter at all. It might just mean it didn't have enough boundaries in it, which is a very different problem and possibly one you can actually do something about. But we can cover that in a different episode. So here's what I'd ask for you to sit with. Think about the person you see the most right now, not the stranger, the regular. And ask yourself honestly, when was the last time something happened between you two that would count as an actual event boundary, not just more of the same or the routine? If you can't think of one, that's not about them. That's about the shape of the routine you're both stuck inside of. And it's maybe a sign to change it up a bit. Maybe even to book your next trip. My name is Kara. This is Put the Guidebook Down. Guidebooks tell you where to go. We're here for why you went. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.